Welcome to 60 Skills. Today's lesson will discuss rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. Classically speaking, these techniques were used to throw an opponent across the room. And while this is a very flashy display of internal power, it masks the more important reasons why a practitioner would want to engage in this. Primarily, practice of these techniques greatly enhances the throughput of subtle energy through the body of a practitioner, and is one of the most effective ways to make a practitioner's ability to work with energy extremely strong. Additionally, at the empty force level, these techniques teach a practitioner how to engage their mental body with the mental body of another person. And this is valuable for any number of reasons involving meditation and esoteric practice. It is, however, not terribly useful for martial arts purposes. The simple fact of the matter is, when you see empty force demonstrations on television where people go flying from across the street without anybody touching one another, it is for the most part a conditioned reflex and has no real application in martial arts. So join 60 Skills today as we explore everything there is to learn about rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss the requirements for practicing rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. At a basic level, you need partners. So at a minimum, you'll require one additional person to practice with. And this exercise works best if you have multiple people to practice with. Additionally, if you want to practice these exercises at the level of the vital, you will need to be able to pour breathe vital energy. If you wish to practice it at the astral or empty force level, you will additionally need to be able to perform astral breathing and the generation of mental energy. So join 60 Skills as we learn everything there is to know about rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. Welcome to 60 Skills. What is rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force? Quite simply put, these are applications of subtle energy going from most gross to most subtle that are frequently used to move an opponent. However, this is really a misnomer. The simple fact of the matter is, this technology is not terribly useful in a martial arts context. And there are a variety of reasons for this, not the least of which is, when someone is actively fighting with another opponent, their subtle bodies tend to lock together very tightly. The result of which is, using esoteric energy to move them around is not terribly efficient. That said, the use of these techniques is very efficient at strengthening the fascia, ligaments, and tendons in the body, enhancing the movement of subtle energy through the body, and strengthening your ability to work with the mental field of another person. All of these things are extremely valuable for any number of activities involving meditation, yoga, and the subtle arts. As a practical matter, this technique in particular is one that all of the strongest practitioners I have personally known included in their repertoire. One of my teachers also says that this is the fastest way to develop subtle energy in the body. We will be addressing the use of vital, astral, and mental energy in the context of training this exercise. However, as is usually the case within 60 Skills, what we are really demonstrating is a series of principles. And the fact of the matter is, these techniques can be applied to any number of energies, be they the Kabbalistic letters, the elements, or the energies of the planets, just to name a few. So to sum up, rebounding is the art of moving another person utilizing subtle energy. The purpose behind this is to strengthen your ability to do this in general and allow you to engage your mental field with the mental field of another person. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. What is the vital aspect of rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. The vital aspect of this exercise utilizes pore breathing. And pore breathing is one of the core techniques that will be utilized throughout this course. In this, a practitioner walks up to another practitioner, develops a line of tension with that person, places their body mass on to that person, and the fascia, ligaments, and tendons in the body rebound the other practitioner away from them. This performs a dynamic loading of the fascia, ligaments, and tendons in the body, the result of which is, over a period of time, this greatly strengthens the movement of vital energy through the body. And as been mentioned many times in this coursework, the stronger your vital energy is, the stronger your astral, mental, akashic, and non-dual light tend to be as well. So the simple fact of the matter is, this is a very potent exercise for training the soft tissue in the body. Now, this is also the only one of the 3 techniques taught today that utilizes momentum. So it's important to keep in mind that this will be the most physically draining of the 3 as well. To the degree any of these can be used in a martial arts context, this would be the technique. It tends to build a kind of reactive power within the body that allows a person to spring load force off of them utilizing their own soft tissue. Basically, you're converting latent potential energy within the body into kinetic energy. And as has been mentioned, this greatly strengthens the movement of energy through the body writ large. Now, you will also be utilizing pore breathing or vital breathing in a build the ball exercise between sets in this exercise. The reason for this is very simple. When you're working with these exercises, you want to be specific about which kind of energy you're engaging with initially. By rebounding another practitioner and then stopping to tune back into vital force using build the ball, this allows you to make sure that you're actually engaging the energetic aspect of what's going on and not the purely mechanical one. Now, the purely mechanical aspect of the vital component of this exercise is critical. The loading is very, very important because this loading will allow your tissues to grow and adapt. However, if you don't make the effort to learn how to tune in to a specific band of subtle energy, you're not going to have much control over that when you need to use it. So again, building the ball is crucial to doing this exercise properly. And you are going to want to perform this between repetitions of this exercise. Now, typically speaking, when practiced, this is a participatory exercise. Okay, it's important to keep in mind this is not a competition. 2 things are happening here. There is the person receiving force who is going to issue and rebound the other person, and there's the person who will be issuing force into the person who will then receive that. So if you treat this as a competition, you're not going to do either of those things very well. Again, this is a participatory exercise. And this leads into the next issue with training this. Many videos are available online of practitioners slingshotting other people across rooms as much as 10 meters or 30 feet at a time. This is not terribly difficult to learn how to do and can be done in a number of weeks. The issue is it involves a high degree of mental and physical conditioning. And this is the curious thing about this practice, is that performed over time, you're going to get used to the energy signature of the people you practice with. The result of which is they're going to be very easy to move. And this can be subconscious. It's a kind of programming that takes place. And it is, in fact, cooperative. These same so-called masters of empty force and Fasciae routinely receive severe beatings online at the hand of MMA artists. And they're always completely surprised. The reason for this is very simple. They've conditioned their students to react the way they do. You don't want this. The fact of the matter is you want to practice these exercises with as many different kinds of people as you can. As a functional matter, roughly 300 to 400 distinct energetic signatures exist in human beings, regardless of culture, race, or creed. So, if you want to be good at performing this exercise, you need to perform this exercise with at least 300 to 400 different kinds of people. This is going to be very tricky. As a practical matter, most practice circles tend to attract 3 or 4 different kinds of people. And again, this can lead to a great deal of delusion regarding the ability of a practitioner to implement these techniques in the real world, or let's say outside a controlled practice environment. So if you want to be able to use any of this on another human being, you're going to need to practice with many different kinds of people. So if you attract mostly martial artists to your circle, you're going to need to bring in some artists, some engineers, some office workers. And likewise, if those are most of the people you deal with, you're going to need to go out and consciously recruit different kinds of people. With time, this exercise, particularly the vital aspect of it, will greatly hone a practitioner's sense of clairsentience or subtle sense of touch. And these energies become quite valuable. For those involved in esoteric healing or traditional healing arts like acupuncture, this is extremely valuable, as it is for body work. But the simple fact of the matter is, if you only practice with the same group of 3 or 4 or half a dozen people consistently, you can generate a fair amount of fascia tissue doing this. But what you will not have is the ability to implement this technology against different kinds of people. You will most certainly not have the ability to implement this technology against people who are actively resisting you or are intent on causing you harm. So again, this is one of the key things about practicing this, particularly at a vital level. You have to practice with many different kinds of people, and it is a cooperative exercise. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss the astral aspect of rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. The astral aspect of this exercise is again normally conducted using touch. One participant will place his arms or hands on another participant. In this case, there will not be much in the way of active issuing, and there will be very little to no transfer of momentum. What will happen is the practitioner touching the other practitioner will want to generate a line of force in that other practitioner. Usually the elbows are used initially, although the truth of the matter is any part of the body can do this. You touch on the elbows, press their force down until you generate a line of force from their arms down to their feet, and then release. This creates a kind of float, which loosens their mental bodies. You then begin to astral breathe. After you've established this energy in yourself, you then begin to astral breathe into and out of the body of the person you are working with. At a certain point in doing this, the other person will lose their balance or become dizzy and begin to fall over. You will then want to break contact, build the ball, this time focusing on astral energy, and re-engage the exercise again. The reason for doing this is very simple. In this case, you're not really training momentum or the fascia tissue in the body. What you're training is the ability to engage in an energetic connection with another human being. This becomes interesting and valuable for any number of reasons, whether that's for meditative purposes, the practice of some form of traditional medicine or energy healing, or the practice of transmission between two individuals. This is also a fairly intimate act. So while you can be fairly loose with who you choose to practice the vital aspects of these exercises with, once you begin to practice the astral and mental level of these exercises, you are going to want to be very choosy about who you practice this with. Because in this case, that transmission of energy between these two people directly influences who they are. So if you're dealing with another person that has a bunch of bad habits, or if you yourself have a bunch of bad habits, that energy is going to be exchanged between the two individuals. Now, this also complicates getting in this kind of transmission to those 300 to 400 different kinds of people we talked about at the vital level. So this transmission of energy becomes very important. But because you're using the sense of touch, or clairsentience, this also involves a high degree of physical empathy. So this exercise in particular will crank up the amount of astral energy you have access to, but also greatly expand your clairsentience, and along with it, your empathic skills. And this is something that doesn't get talked about a whole lot in esoteric circles. You see, when you engage in empathy, it's not about thinking nicely about someone or doing something nice for them. It's a physical and energetic skill that takes place. And when this happens, you actually become the other person. I first noticed this myself when I was dealing with a family member who was quite angry. And whenever I got around that person, even though they hid it very well, I would suddenly become very angry and couldn't figure out why. And then when I stopped associating with that family member, all of a sudden this went away. That's an example of empathy. Empathy is an energetic skill, and when it is engaged without a great deal of mental stillness and clarity, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between what is you and what is the other person. So because of this, when you engage the astral aspect of Fasciae rebounding or empty force, you need to be very particular about who you practice with. And at a minimum, your ability to engage in pore breathing to ventilate all of this from yourself and engage in other esoteric hygiene becomes rather important. But again, if you want to be able to work on this level with every available kind of human being, you're going to need to search out 300 to 400 different kinds of people to do this with. In the course of doing that, some of them are going to have energetic signatures that you're not going to like very much. It's simply the price for dealing with what we deal with here. That said, learning techniques like the 3 releases and practicing good esoteric hygiene is a convenient way to mitigate a lot of this. Also understand this will begin to make you quite sensitive to the energy of a place you're in and the people in it. In many ways, this acts as a kind of energetic radar for what's going on in the area around you, and as such can become very important. But understand that you will go through a phase in doing this in which you'll be walking around and all of a sudden a particular emotion will come over you for no apparent reason. It's important to realize that when this happens, it is not in fact you. It is in fact someone else. And this is in and of itself a very valuable thing to be able to realize. This is also where the single-pointed focus exercises come in, things like pranayama, etc., etc. And on that note, a proper way to reestablish that energetic boundary that dampens down on empathy but increases your ability to recognize it as something separate to yourself is the engagement of aggressive forms of pranayama. Specifically, those forms of breath retention that focus on filling the lungs with air and holding the lungs filled with air for extended periods of time. This is one of the few things that I've seen that tends to result in a great deal of control over this activity to a practitioner. So if you have excessive problems with empathy, in this case the energetic physical skill of empathy, consider learning pranayama properly from a qualified practitioner. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss the mental aspect, or empty force aspect, of rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. Okay, let's get the gorilla out of the room. Empty force is not useful for martial arts purposes at all. When this is used against other people, it is most often a conditioned reaction on the part of the recipient. This is the reason why you can go online and find lots of videos of empty force or Tai Chi masters being completely destroyed by MMA artists, and incidentally being completely surprised by the fact that it's happening. As was mentioned before, there are approximately 300 to 400 different energetic signatures that human beings have. When you work with a given group of people long enough, and you employ these exercises, they will begin to subconsciously respond to these exercises even when they shouldn't. This is one of the reasons why, if you're going to train this at anything other than the vital level, you have to have multiple people to practice with, and you have to cycle through those people quite frequently. This is complicated because the ability to feed energy or momentum or body weight onto you as the practitioner is also a skill that has to be developed. And the simple fact of the matter is most people aren't good at it. So you need to understand that mental energy, or the use of mental energy to move people around, what is commonly known as empty force, is not a martial arts technique. It is mostly a conditioned response. So why do we do it? Well, it turns out the empty force techniques are a very good way of teaching a practitioner how to have their mental body interact with the mental body of another person. In fact, it's probably the best way to do this. Now again, this is distinctly different from the astral body or the physical body. So the way this is performed is you and your practice partner, again, this isn't competitive, you're not forcing someone to do something, you're working with them, stand next to each other. Typically, a distraction technique is utilized to get the other person to relax. So again, the touching on elbows, creating a line of force, and then letting go makes people a little off balance, and that tends to make their mental body a little loose, which makes this exercise much easier. It doesn't have to be done that way, but it commonly is. Then at this point, the practitioner, or in this case the projector of energy, will hold their hands above the elbows or a few inches to maybe 15 centimeters away from their practice partner. At this point, they will begin generating mental energy. Once they've gotten this mental energy to a fairly strong state, they will then begin generating mental energy inside the body of their practice partner. At a certain point, most people become a little dizzy and they lose their sense of balance. Now, this can be played up quite a great deal on video for some of the empty force demonstrations you're going to find. And when you throw in a bunch of conditioning on the part of students expecting to react a certain way to their teacher, you can see how this happens. I've personally never been able to employ this in a way that allowed me to move someone who I had not worked with by just waving my hands from across the street. It really doesn't seem to work that way. Perhaps it does for some people, it most certainly does not for me. So keep in mind, the purpose of this exercise is to learn how to interact your mental body with the mental body of another human being. This in turn is very valuable for esoteric medical practice, for transmitting different yogic and meditative skills into people, and to having group experiences in meditation. So there are many valuable reasons to learn how to do this. Martial arts, however, is not one of them. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss fascia development and throughput. As was mentioned early on in this course, when utilizing the rebounding, fasciae, and empty force techniques at the vital level, this is an extremely valuable way of training the fascia, ligaments, and tendons in the body. As has also been frequently mentioned in the 60 Skills coursework, this is one of the most effective ways of building the throughput, or the ability of a practitioner to transmit energy through their body. Now, one of the reasons why this technique in particular is valuable is most of the other forms of training this involve solo practice through various twisting or yogic exercises, or the use of resistance such as weights or bands, or walking techniques that manipulate this tissue in a whole body manner. But here's the interesting part of it. While we delineate things as being mental, astral, and physical for the purpose of specific training methodology, the fact of the matter is the mental, astral, and physical are all interlaced, primarily through the mental astral matrix and the astral physical matrix. So this is interesting. Okay, if all of these things are actually layered together, you can't really divide them out. That is true. We create these artificial delineations between them that are devoted to majority of effort because this allows us to train effectively. However, all of the other things we talked about training involve you working on you or you utilizing an external object for resistance. The advantage to the throwing exercises is now you're using the resistance of another human being. So when these people come in and apply momentum and force onto your body, they're also applying energy, be that vital, astral, or mental. And the transference of this energy clears the pipes out in the body, makes the movement of energy far more effective, and strengthens those tissues at the same time. For this reason, training these techniques radically increases the amount of energy a practitioner can work with. Because not only are you getting the physical reflex and pressure on those subtle bodies, which you can do to yourself, but you're also getting the transfer of energy between partners. So not only is the person issuing force getting stronger, the person receiving force is getting stronger too. For this reason, these exercises are some of the most valuable I have ever seen. And out of all of my teachers who had a great deal of energetic strength, all of them practiced some variation of this. Some more than others, some for just a period of time in their life, and for others it was a lifelong pursuit. But whether you want to improve your mental transference skills, your ability to work with astral energy, or simply have really strong vital power in the body for a healthy, strong body, these techniques are really hard to beat. And they're hard to beat because they involve the energy of another living being. And that's something you really can't do to yourself. So again, in terms of training fascia, ligament, and tendon, this is super valuable. And in fact, after performing these exercises for 6 months to a year, most people will find that if another person grabs their arm or in the intercostal area on the torso where the skin is thin, it'll feel as if there's a sheet of plastic underlying the skin. It's a very distinct feeling and a very distinct form of internal energy development that only internal energy practitioners have, by the way. I have my suspicions as to why this happens, but nothing really scientific. That said, it is one of the telltale signs of you're dealing with somebody who's done a lot of internal power development. The ritual practitioners don't get this either. So this is one of the giveaways. In classical Tai Chi circles, this was sometimes referred to as steel wrapped in cotton. It is a unique form of development and something that radically enhances your throughput of power and radically enhances the physical durability of a practitioner as well. So for all of these reasons, the practice of these exercises is very valuable. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss practice design in terms of rebounding, Fasciae, and empty force. Okay. First of all, you need to get together a group of people to practice with. At a minimum, one other person, but obviously more than one is valuable. And the reason for this is simple. Particularly when practiced at the vital level, these exercises can be quite exhausting. As a general rule, you want to practice this for at least an hour a day. 2 hours a day broken up into a morning and evening session are ideal, and I have known people who have practiced as much as 5 to 5.5 hours a day. Although at this point, let's be honest, that becomes a full-time profession. When performing these exercises, you want to take a break between issuing and receiving. So when you issue force and rebound your opponent, before they come in to do it again, build the ball, tune into the kind of energy you're working with, vital, astral, mental, Kabbalistic letter, planetary energy, elemental energy, whatever, and then engage the exercise again. Typically 9 rounds between switching sides and having the issuer become the receiver is typical. So again, you want to do 9 rounds broken up by building the ball for a second or two. And again, this also trains you to be able to engage your energy very quickly, in which you tune back into the energy you're working with. Now, if you're only doing this at the vital level to build fascia tissue and clairsentience, you don't need to build the ball very much. What will be tricky is if you do this too quickly, your practice partner won't effectively load their mass onto you. And this will make the exercise less efficient and greatly increase the risk of injury. This brings up another issue. The vital aspect of this exercise involves the repeat loading of a large amount of force onto the body and the bouncing of the receiver a distance and landing on their feet. As I said, this can be exhausting. Typically, I've found practice works best if in an hour-long or hour-and-a-half-long practice, I break it up into thirds. 1/3 vital, 1/3 astral, 1/3 mental. Because after 20 to 30 minutes of continuous practice with one of these 3, you begin to get tired. And again, as a practical matter, I recommend doing vital first, astral second, mental third. Although you can experiment with this. So ideally, you want 1-hour practice sessions in which you engage in 9 repetitions before switching position. You need to practice this for a minimum of 6 months to a year and a half. Now, that said, what is interesting is you keep roughly 1/3 of whatever ability you built to. So if you practiced 5 hours a day for a year and a half, and you stopped practicing altogether, you'll keep about 1/3 of the ability you built. And in my case, even though I have not practiced these exercises regularly for years, I still have a tremendous transmission ability as compared to most other people, particularly at the mental level and a little bit at the astral. The fascia tissue that gets built and the integration of tissue that happens appears to be permanent. But again, I'm only in my 50s. We'll see if it lasts longer than that. Now that said, you can maintain whatever level of ability you've built by practicing roughly at 1/10 as much as it took you to build that ability. So if you were practicing 10 hours a week, you could go down to 1 hour a week of practice and still maintain that strength level. So these are some things to keep in mind involving practice. Again, be generous and careful with your practice partners. Particularly when working at the vital level, it's very easy to rack up injuries to your spine and joints. The shoulders, interestingly enough, are the easiest thing to get injured, along with the knees and ankles from landing after having been thrown. And in general, you want to practice for a minimum of 1 hour.